Hello, I'm Angus Kress Gillespie, your host for Old Ways in New Jersey here on East Brunswick Television. I'm here today with Elizabeth Reeves, a licensed architect and architectural historian, because we're doing part two of our College Avenue tour of Rutgers University. In many ways, this is the heart of the old traditional Rutgers University. And as we explained last time, it's fascinating because what we really have is sort of a time capsule. Basically, the city of New Brunswick in the 19th century gradually expanded from east to west. And as it expanded, new buildings were built. So the idea is that as you move from east to west out College Avenue, you're moving in time throughout the 19th century, one decade after another. And furthermore, what's interesting is, as Rutgers University expanded, Rutgers tended to buy up these old houses. And on the whole, Rutgers University has been very conscientious about architectural preservation, but it's a somewhat mixed record, and I'd like Elizabeth Reeves, architectural historian, to speak to Rutgers' record in historical preservation.
Thank you, Angus. Yes, Rutgers has usually had a very good record with historic preservation. The College Avenue houses, we begun rehabilitation of the houses in 2010. As the university or College Avenue campus begins to redevelop, however, we're in danger of losing more of the houses that we have already lost. This part of the campus used to be lined with single-family residences. Some belonged to professors and later became fraternity houses. So this was sort of the Union Street, if you will, of Rutgers. This section down here, after we just completed Bishop House, and this section is the early 20th century section of the university. This whole area was primarily blank after the purchase of Bishop House. It was used for athletic fields. It was used actually as open space. College Park was located where the river dorms are. So this was the last section of Rutgers that was accessible to the river on the banks. We're concerned about the possible loss of these houses, and one of the reasons that we're concerned about that is that there are two ways of looking at historic architecture. One way is to look at them building by building. In this particular case down here, we have to look at them as sites of places that we have lost, and as a collection of buildings of what's left, as almost a district. Now, these buildings are not on the National Register of Historic Places, but Rutgers has made a pretty good effort to try to adaptively reuse most of these houses. We're building new academic buildings, new dormitories, which vacates these houses. There are some 400 clubs here at Rutgers. So one idea might be to give each of the clubs space in these houses so that they can be adaptively reused. Preserving or rehabilitating old houses is considered to be green architecture according to the LEED standards. Not demolishing these buildings saves energy because we're not filling up the landfills. We're upgrading them to be more energy efficient, and we have uses for them. So if we look at this early 20th century section of College Avenue as a district, we are going to tour some of the examples of the more important buildings lying within the district.
Elizabeth, tell us about the College Avenue gym.
Yes, the College Avenue gym is the second gym here at Rutgers. It was built in 1931 after the original gym, the Ballantine Gymnasium on the Voorhees Mall, it exploded and burned. So the building was actually the site of several important events, including a congressional convocation for the state, but most importantly to Rutgers. The basketball team in 1975 and 76 made it to the NCAA Final Four, and this was the scene of many of the playoff basketball games.
And wasn't it also nicknamed the Barn, and weren't there concerts here as well?
There were concerts here. There were all kinds of student activities held in this building, and there still are. It is home to some of the athletic teams. And the barn name comes from the fact that when you go inside the building, it's completely open inside like a barn.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the chimneys at the end and the dormers on the roof and the cupola?
Yes, this is a typical Wren type of, Sir Christopher Wren type of cupola. It is a Georgian revival structure. Frequently the two chimneys on the end wall were typical of the English. However, the parapet of the brick walls on the end of the roof are of Dutch origin.
So it's kind of eclectic.
It's very eclectic. It's an icon of the university. Now, before the gym was built, this site was the site of the very first football game, intercollegiate football game, in 1869. It was basically just a rocky field, very rough, and football had not developed into a collegiate sport. We played Princeton University, and we beat Princeton 6-4 under a different point system. So it would be like a 42-24.
And so that was really the birth of American collegiate football.
Yes, it was. We are the birthplace of American collegiate football.
Our regular viewers will recall that we ended the first segment of the College Avenue program with the Bishop House. Now, for the second segment, we've moved directly across the street to 122 College Avenue for the Center for Latino Arts and Culture, which is characterized by the colorful paint job on the columns out front. But Elizabeth, tell us a little bit more about the history of this building.
This particular building, again, was another house purchased by Rutgers. And it became, during the 1960s, the Black House as a result of the civil rights movement and the unrest here at Rutgers University, the protests. Many colleges and universities across the country did a similar effort to offer the black students, the minority students, a place to call their own, to get together and preserve their culture. I believe it's really interesting that it is now the Center for Latino Arts and Culture, because the building is still used for minority assimilation into the Rutgers University community.
We're continuing our study of the historic buildings of College Avenue, and we're right behind the historic Bishop House. And this is the so-called Bishop Quadrangle, which is an interesting complex of Georgian buildings which was built in the 1930s, just after the Great Depression, when the enrollment of Rutgers started to expand. It's very interesting architecturally and a very pleasant quadrangle. Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, this quadrangle was actually built in stages. It has 4 buildings as part of the complex. The quad area itself used to be a large grassy field, and it was recently redone as it had become completely paved. The buildings actually had lounges. For example, the Loop building has a German Rathskeller as its student lounge with a giant fireplace, German detailing, and wood benches. Um, the last building to be built was Hegeman Hall, which is on the right-hand side. And Hegeman Hall was actually the first dormitory for one of the first Peace Corps groups. And there is a commemorative plaque on it as the Peace Corps celebrated a major birthday just a few years ago. Now, the buildings are all separated by arcades similar to the ones separating Pell and Hegeman Halls. So you could walk down to the other side of campus, almost all the way down to the river. Of course, this arcade would lead down to the College Park, which was a green space along the river, now the site of the river dorms and the SAC.
There's some interesting architectural detailing. I see that all of them have that dentilation at the roof line. But I noticed that the Pell building over here on our left has these keystones above the windows, whereas Hegeman does not have the keystones.
That would be because they were built at different times, but they are built in the same genre.
And they're complementary.
They're complementary, yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the roof has the appearance of slate, or is it just a look like slate?
It is actually a look-alike slate. The roofs were repaired at some point in time. Some of those actually recently. Some of the roofs are still slate.
But the imitation slate is very convincing.
It's very, very convincing. We're very careful the materials that we choose to use on these buildings. Now, unfortunately, the buildings are about to be renovated up to the level of the current codes for housing, and our arcade is going to go away, and we're going to get a glass structure in between the two buildings, so all of the buildings now will connect. The buildings also, when originally designed, the lower floor all had shutters on them. So it was really kind of a premier dormitory. The dorm rooms now are being completely renovated. The bathrooms are being completely renovated. So the buildings are unoccupied at this point. Construction should begin on this somewhere, my guess is around springtime.
It's an interesting conflict between bringing the buildings up to code and architectural preservation. I like the way it looks at present, and I'm not sure I like the way it will look after the construction's done, but I guess time marches on.
Time marches on, and that's a great purpose for this show because it documents things that we are likely to lose at some point in time. So now we have a really good documentation of this quadrangle as it is today.
It's a real architectural gem as it stands today. We're here at the front door of Hegeman Hall, and it's very historically important because it was site of a Peace Corps launching, and I'd like to step aside and just read a few words from this plaque. What the plaque says is, Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, was the first campus selected for the training of America's first Peace Corps volunteers, a group that served in the Republic of Colombia. On June 21st, 1961, these volunteers arrived at Rutgers and lived here in Hegeman Hall. They learned Spanish, studied Colombian culture and history, and pursued rigorous physical conditioning, and later were sent on to Colombia. As we exit the arcade from the Bishop Quadrangle, we have a very interesting view of the back of Rutgers Hall along with the smokestack of the power plant. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit more about Rutgers Hall.
Yes, Rutgers Hall is actually a World War II surplus airplane hangar that Rutgers was given to create exhibition space, large span building space. Of course, after World War II, we had the GI Bill and a lot of returning vets. So all down along here where the river dorms are, were classrooms. And I imagine there were student services in Records Hall. Now you can see Records Hall on the left side was dressed up to look like a nice building. But as we look at the back of the building, we can see the old World War II metal siding and the airplane hangar part of the building. Now the building extended down just about to the chimney. You can see the metal roofing, which is original. The chimney, of course, marks where the central power plant is for the College Avenue campus. And that includes the chiller unit and the high temp hot water generation area. Now, I also want to point out that we are up higher than the plateau that Records Hall is on. This was the site of Nelson Field, which was the second football field for Rutgers. It was a much more formal field. It had a running track around it, plus the football field. It did have grandstands, fencing, and this is where Paul Robeson played.
A moment ago, we were looking at the rear side of Records Hall, which we explained was a former World War II airplane hangar. So now we're looking at the front facade of Records Hall, which poses a sort of interesting question. How do architects make a World War II aircraft hangar belong on a college campus? Well, they put a facade on. But the facade is quite eclectic. I'm really at a loss as to describe the style. Elizabeth, help me out.
The style of this building is a mishmash of classical vocabulary. So, for example, we have the Palladian arched windows. We are missing the Greek dental work. We have very low-pitched roofs, which were typical of the Greek, and yet we have American colonial paneled shutters on the windows. The arched windows are original to the building when it was renovated, probably as a community center. And the lower windows, again, with the mutton patterns in the windows, the grid pattern would have been original to the community center type of activities that took place in the building. Now, it was renovated when all of the student services, the post office, the bursar, computer center were put into this building. There are a number of offices in this building, financial aid, dining services, but that's when the brick was put on.
I think it's fair to say that this is an excellent example of adaptive use. It's more of a green use of the building. After all, what are we dealing with here? This is a World War II aircraft hangar, but it's been adaptively reused for the university's purposes, and that saves energy, it avoids the landfill. It's actually extremely clever, don't you think?
I think this is one of the most clever uses of a historic building here on the campus.
Much better than tearing it down.
Yes, and the only thing that's different between this and an airplane hangar are the windows, of course the brick facade, but inside it's only been partitioned off into offices. So
which is very economical.
If you were to take all those partitions out, it would return to an airplane hangar again.
Cool. Next, let us consider the David Lloyd Krieger Learning Resource Center, which has a facade which complements the facade of the aircraft hangar that we just looked at. And it's interesting, it's now repurposed as the Learning Resource Center for students who need extra help. But before that, if I'm not mistaken, it was the bookstore.
That's correct. And remember, these structures are post-World War II. So the Learning Resource Center was not a World War II surplus structure. So technically, the Records Hall imitated the bookstore.
Well, it works. It's kind of a little mini plaza.
It really does, and of course the Learning Resource Center is a very important building here on the campus for students who need tutoring or extra help with their courses.
We're here at the Simeon DeWitt House on College Avenue, which was built in the 1930s, a kind of classical revival style. We noticed that particularly on the front porch, which has a Greek temple form. But fill us in on some of the details, Elizabeth.
Okay, well, first of all, the house itself was built by the Michelin family from France. New Brunswick, rather, was a very large manufacturing center, including Michelin tires. So they had a factory here. Consequently, they built a house to monitor their operations when they were in New Brunswick. The house is of an classical revival style, typical of the 1930s. Was very, very popular at the time, particularly for more distinctive, wealthy type of families.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail here. You got the coins on the corners of the building, you got the dentilation at the roof line, you got the dormers at the roof. It's more detailed than need be.
That's exactly right. And I want to point out the cornices over top of the first floor windows, and they are Art Deco.
Oh, so they are, yes.
Okay, so it's a conglomeration, but that was typical of the 1930s. And again, knowledge of architecture and classicism was a display of wealth, of privilege, of education. So after the Michelins sold the house, they sold it to Rutgers University, and it became the house of Dr. Robert Clothier, who of course was the president of the university, before the university purchased the president's house
on the other
over on the other side of the river. That's correct. Since then, it has been, taken over by academic uses. And it's named Simeon DeWitt after a very early graduate of Rutgers University, or actually Queens College, who became a surveyor and map maker for George Washington during the Revolutionary War. This building is an example of what rehabilitation to an old building will do. We found photographs of the Michelin house when it was first built. So the color scheme, everything with the exception of the roof, has been accurately put back, even though this building is not on the National Register.
And what about the curvilinear feature of the roof in the rear?
That is actually a Dutch detail. So I'm not quite sure why they did it, unless they needed to get more space and they wanted the gable in the center of the building.
Very interesting. So it's partly Art Deco, partly Dutch, but fundamentally classical revival.
That's correct.
Okay, here we are at the intersection of College Avenue and Huntington Street. If we look off to our left, we see an old building which is being rehabbed. Tell us more about it, Elizabeth.
Yes, I wanted to stop here specifically because this is a good example of the process Rutgers has been taking to rehab the old buildings on College Avenue, the old houses, and figure out how to give them more space. So in this case, the addition happens behind the building on another street, but at the same time, the old residence now is rehabbed with new porch, new painted siding, roofing. It's just been fixed up so that it fits now the avenue.
It seems to me what you're saying here is that it's more economical to fix up these old buildings and to tear it down and replace it with a new one. Not only is it more economical, but it's more environmentally sound.
It's more environmentally sound. By the LEED standards, if you save 15% of your energy costs on these old houses, you qualify for LEED certification. It is the official organization that certifies green buildings.
Okay, we're here at the foot of College Avenue, and we have three buildings in a row. 191, 193, 195 College Avenue, all done by the same architect, Alexander Merchant, who was an important regional architect with his headquarters in Highland Park, where he did many of his buildings, but he also did a few here in New Brunswick. And these three make a nice grouping because they're all a classical revival, all built around the same time, the very early 20th century.
That's correct. Alexander Merchant actually was very prolific, and these were amongst his earliest commissions. They were done as, again, upper middle class, very elegant type of residences with lots of different colonial details. So we have segmental arches, and we have lights over top of doorways. We have foyers. We have this big bay window, which was very typical of the arts and crafts style. So even though it's a mix of styles, this particular classical revival was very popular at this period of time. And of course, we talked about it with the Michelin house. Now, originally, there was a whole block of houses here. So from Simeon DeWitt, this new academic building was a house lot, and then you had these three houses down here. I do call this area the Merchant Block, and I'm very fond of it. The Historical Society in Highland Park is very fond of it. The cache of Alexander Merchant drawings are now housed in the New Brunswick Free Public Library.
Elizabeth, I want to thank you for this enlightening tour of College Avenue, and it's been very interesting. It now brings our two programs to a close with a view of the historical importance and the need to preserve these old buildings.
Thank you very much for having me, Angus. I really appreciate letting me get the message out that history is our past as well as our future.
Thank you.